notwithstanding that my hair color has completely changed and it continues to get more and more messy. But I think it's a really great chance just to put on some lipstick and get changed out of my second pair of pajamas. I have my daytime pajamas and my nighttime pajamas. I was in New York when this all went down, so when I came back into Canada, I had to fly home early after Trump said, this Friday we're closing flights basically. So I got back into Canada, and I've basically been quarantined for for almost 3 full weeks now. So this is great, and it's I think a wonderful initiative, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity. Happy 31st of March to everybody in the future, and to those of us over here in North America, happy 30th. I do truly hope that you're all in good health, and certainly all of those that are near and dear to you as well. We are certainly dealing in strange times, and I think that this is a really great opportunity to share the talk that I'm going to share with you. Bear with me, because I think it's just going to be possible stuff is just not going to go right, or I'm going to end up over clicking, or maybe the internet's going to go down. I'm not really sure, but let's just do it. So a number of years ago, in 2014, like I said, I presented a talk on leadership at the DARE Festival, which was also, as you know, hosted by Ed and his team. And I spoke about sort of the personal journey of being a leader. And the talk was a much more reflective piece. It wasn't on, sort of what are the top 10 rules, the list of things to do. It was much more on like that personal experience that I had. And at the time, just so you know, as a bit of a time lapse, or not time lapse, but like a bit of a timeline about what happened, because I think a lot of people here don't know about me. When I presented that, I was working for REA Group, and I had a bit of an international role. At the time of presenting this, I had just arrived back in Melbourne from doing like a 5-month stint between Hong Kong and Milan. And I had just gotten back maybe a week or two before, and I had come back specifically to present for this. I was working in sort of delivery roles up to the stage, iteration manager, delivery manager. I ended up with head of technology, and then close this poll. I ended up in a head of technology role, and I soon after this ended up taking an interim CTO role at Redbubble, which is obviously another incredible digital success story of Australia. I did that role for, interim for a short while. And it was soon after that I ended up getting an offer to take a position as a VP operations for a startup, late stage startup in Berlin for Home24. So this company was basically an e-commerce platform, or is an e-commerce platform for home furnishings. I was with them, and, by the time I started, it was kind of like, oh, and hey, by the way, welcome to Germany. Would you also like to do product management? So not only was I doing operations, I was all of a sudden also doing product, which was the first time I had ever done product. But okay, so I did that. Following that, I did a short stint at Scout24, which is kind of like an REA equivalent, if you're familiar with it. It's auto and property. And I then got kind of pulled away to work for Spotify, and it was through Jason Yip, actually. Many of you would know him, who had reached out to me while I was in Berlin, saying, "Hey, by the way, would you be interested in this position?" And when he sent it to me, I was like, there's my position. What's my position doing over there? So I applied for it and kept progressing. I thought, okay, this is a bit, I was not expecting to get all the way through, but I thought, good chance, like take a stab, why not? And at the time I was interviewing, I was supposed to be going to New York, but as the interviews progressed for this role, which was a director of delivery operations, reporting to the CTO at Spotify, it kind of changed and said, the leadership team is basically, particularly the tech leadership team is in Stockholm, Sweden. Would you go for that? I'm like, well, I haven't been, but sure, why not, And so I ended up moving to Stockholm, where I spent 3 years working for Spotify. And the time I was at Spotify, I had 3 different roles. So I started in delivery operations. From that, I moved into technology platform, which is basically all the back end, hosting, business systems, security. I was with that team for more than 2 years. And then I moved into the economics team, reporting to the chief economist for, another 6, 8 months or whatever it was. However that works out, but it ended up being 3 years. And then we're going to go into a little bit about why I left and what's happened since. As you know, I'm now in Edmonton in Canada, back home with family. And, I'm quite grateful that it did work out that way, given what's happening in the world now. So that's just a bit of a background about like the journey that I've gone through in 6 years. And just to be really clear, it's one that started in Australia. And I had already been spending a lot of time overseas in Asia, and then into Italy, and then it was to Berlin, then to Stockholm, and of course now I'm back in Canada. And keeping with the theme, Ed and I spoke about a number of subjects I could speak about. It was like, what do you want to talk about? And I have a lot of things I want to talk about. But we decided, kind of keeping with the best of theme, what we could do was take a look at what's happened in the 6 years since I was at REA. Since I gave that talk, do I have a fundamentally different perspective? What's changed? What do I value? What do I want to do? Where am I at? And in keeping with the spirit of that, this talk is what I call part 2 of my story. It is also going to be based on the experiences. So spoiler alert, click off now if you're wanting to know about the Spotify, model and organizational know-how, reporting, etc. I'm very happy to do another talk on that and some of the things that I've learned in terms of the management and I guess organizational things that I've done over the last few years. But this one's going to be much more of that personal story, again, keeping with the sort of theme that I had presented on last time. You get 3 more seconds before you have to click off if this isn't what you want to listen to. But I think this is actually a very important talk, and I really, truly hope that everybody stays on this talk, because particularly with what's happening now, the experience that I had, I think there's a lot to be learned from that. And I think as managers and leaders, regardless of whether you're a manager or not, you're dialing in for this call, and I think that says a lot. But I really want to drive home a few points that I think are super fundamental with, and Ed just pointed it out, with not just COVID and this virus and the way that it's changing society, but certainly in Australia, with the fires and the floods, we have massive food shortages and instability in food markets now because of pest infestations and unreliable cropping. We have Brexit, we have so many political changes, we have Syria, we have mass immigrations, and experts say this is just the beginning. And as people, individuals dealing with this, but also leaders, we have to really start being very clear about the impact of stress, the impact of uncertainty, the impact of change, and the impact now particularly of isolation. A lot of what's happening is totally out of our control. We have no control over a lot of what is going on in the world. We're becoming, we're individuals in this. We have our pieces, and what I want to do is to be able to really connect with you guys in terms of what your piece can be with what's coming and what's already happening. I know it looked glamorous, and my Instagram account is good. I've been blessed, and I want to make it really clear that even though there was all this change and all these things happening, and certainly lots of challenges, I still count my blessings. It did look glamorous, and don't get me wrong, many parts of it were. I mean, I have had a rare opportunity to travel the world. I've had an incredibly rare opportunity to work for some of these world-leading organizations, and I include all of the organizations I've worked for in that category. But the important thing that I want you to know is that, and parts of it were, but that I suffered. And I don't think, well, I know that at the time I was suffering, I didn't really fully get it. Like, certainly I was lonely, or I was stressed, or I was, confused. And, I'm in Germany dealing with the bureaucracy, which is in German. I don't speak the language. I'm dealing with cultural changes. I don't have friends. I have a new job. I'm all of a sudden doing product, it was a lot. And then to move into Spotify, into Sweden, it's a totally different culture again. I was being stretched at a rate that was really tremendous. And although I did not recognize that at the time, because I think suffering, this is an important point, suffering, I think, is very innocuous. It can be very innocuous. Even when you're a little bit anxious, it can be kind of like, you can dismiss it. Unless you're really paying attention, you wouldn't know it. And that was certainly the case for me. What's also important, and I'm getting to sort of fundamental point of what I want to share with you, is I am not the only one, and I was not the only one. I know a lot of people, and I think it gets even to some degree harder as you're kind of getting more senior. I think by the time you're getting to middle management, they say middle management is the hardest place to be. I would agree with that. But by the time you're getting into senior leadership roles, the suffering is pretty tremendous, and the amount of support that we would have to give to each other, if they were available for that, was notable. But here's some statistics that I want to share with you when I'm talking about the level of suffering. 264 million people are currently affected by depression worldwide. That is a staggering number. And I'm going to give you another number here, which is that COVID currently has, and this is the statistic as of today, is 764,866 cases open worldwide at the moment. That's like 0.28%. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be responding to COVID. I'm not saying that it isn't critical. It is. And I know that that number would be higher if we weren't. But what I'm going to stress to you through this is that given the level of response that we have to responding to this, why are we not responding to that number of 264 million people? And I'm going to give you some more numbers here to build this case. Globally, 800,000 people die per year of suicide. They kill themselves. Obviously, that's what suicide is. But that is a staggering number as well. Again, COVID deaths to date, and this is basically since January, 36,865, 4.61% of that number. And you have to think that this 800,000 every year. The number is staggering. And again, should we be doing stuff with of course we should, but I want to stress that we also need to be addressing mental illness, depression, and suicide. Troubling, for every suicide, there are many people who attempt to commit suicide. And it is the second leading cause of death between 15 and 29-year-olds. For many of you, if you think about tech sector, fairly young, these are troublesome. It is not to say, that 15, 29-year-olds are the only one. Of course not, but it is the second leading cause, and that is tremendous. I took the liberty of looking up some statistics on Worldometers, and this is for COVID currently. And I just want to bring this up because, if you're looking at the numbers here in Australia's, as of the 24th of January, there are, 4,000 cases, of which 3,983 still remain open. And I mean, you can look for, and the link is there. If you want to, you can look for your own country, wherever you might be dialing in for. And I just focus on Australia, knowing that the majority of the audience is Australian today, or at least in Australia. So if you take a look at those numbers, now keeping in mind January 24th and the sort of total numbers, I then looked up statistics on suicide in Australia. And there were some troubling statistics here. And, if you look at any country, they're fairly troubling, but it's not talked about too much. There are 8 deaths by suicide in Australia every day. And for every death by suicide, it is estimated that 30 people attempt to end their lives. You can sort of extrapolate that. In 68 days, there would be 544 deaths. That's 30 times the number of COVID so far. and that's 16,000 attempts. That is tremendous. And so what I'm building here is just some awareness, I think, of how serious this really is. And I also want to build in the possibility of being able to manage this and to put a concerted effort into dealing with this. Finally, there was another point here is that, and I think this is important too, is that, the death rate for suicide is 3 times higher for men than women. And the reason I bring this up is that particularly in tech, where we have kind of predominantly, we have more men typically working in tech than females, you have to watch that number because it could be a disproportionate amount of the people that are on your teams. These numbers could be exaggerated. And then, of course, you have to adjust for factors on lots of different fronts, et cetera. But it is important to sort of look at the statistics. I mean, there's Aboriginal Torres Strait Islanders, a massive percentage. And I think that this is really concerning about what's happening. And again, wherever you're dialing in from, you can look it up. This is Lifeline Australia. Very easy Google search will give you the number immediately as some indication of what's going on. The reason I bring this up for you as managers particularly, I mean, okay, so people are committing suicide. Didn't happen in my company. Sure, maybe not suicide, but I'll sure tell you what, depression and anxiety is running rampant. And the problem with that is that you can hire great people and they cannot perform. And that was certainly the case with me. When you are depressed, when you are highly anxious, you are not functioning. You do not cope. And this is deeply troubling. So, I mean, there's lots of characteristics about what it is and what it looks like. Good to know about, good to do a self-check, good to think about. And I'm going to go into a little bit about my story about all of this change and risk and uncertainty and anxiety and pace and pressure and delivery and loneliness and how this all started to add up for me. And again, I really, the reason that I want you to understand this, again, if this isn't already clear, is because as leaders, you are in the middle of dealing with so much of complexity. And people, as a leader, I think you're a shepherd of your sheep, right? If that's the analogy, you're the caretaker to a large degree. And, Andy made a really great comment that I just want to pull on yesterday. He talked about even when you might have to prune people or people aren't working out, is that it's always done with deep respect and care. And if you were good enough when you brought them in, you care for them in the journey they're there and you care for them on the way out. And as leaders, I think, times are going to get tough. And I heard, I didn't catch her name, but, she was saying she got laid off in the midst of all of this. And now she's at home. Like, as leaders, I want you to be paying attention. And I think we're all aware of this, but I'm really hoping that this is a serious call for the level of attention and care that you need. And not just for others, but for your own self as well. What I can say is that I've certainly changed. I changed in the time that I was in each of those countries, remarkably, like a very different person for each of those countries and those cultures and those companies and the culture of those companies. But I've in the time since leaving Spotify late last year, I value different things fundamentally now. I want different things. I think about things differently. I know myself more. And for better or for worse, I mean, there are still parts of me that are still, putting this all together. And I think I really want to stress that and I guess ask for a bit of leniency in terms of my story, because my story is written from where I am today. And your perspective changes the way you view or you remember things, the way you process the story, the way you look at what happened. And particularly if you're coming out of depression and anxiety, the way that you look at things then and the way that I look at things now is different. But I am still putting it all together, and I'm really been challenging myself, or I have been challenged to really deeply consider what it is I value and what it is I need and how it is that life should be for me. I think I'm almost 45, you know, and when I look at that number, it's like I'm kind of halfway through my life now. The last 44 and 3/4 years went by incredibly quickly. The next ones are going to fly by even faster, and I want them to count. So I have divided this, and I'm going to pause here in just a second. I have divided this talk into 7 chapters, and they kind of, they'll resonate, particularly with what's going on with COVID at the moment. But in both, they're parallel because both of them are diseases, and both of them have, you know, the same sort of course of susceptibility and infection and symptoms and treatment and recovery. And I want to take you through that. And I'm asking that as we go through that you really think about your own journey and where you're at, but also thinking about paying attention if you're particularly, you know, working with others at the moment, and your team is thinking about who's going to be most susceptible. And that's going to be the first one. I'm going to pause there for a second. I've seen Q&A and notes coming up, but I've been a little bit reluctant to pause to deal with them. Is there anything I should answer immediately, or do we keep going?
Keep going, because they were just test questions.
Perfect. Okay, I love test questions. Okay, so
quick question though, your polls are ready there, so you tell me.
Okay.
Apart from the third one, which I can't do open response, only the first 2.
Okay, the first one was which one again? What's the question?
The stresses. Personal.
Okay, good. Yes, that's after this. Yeah, so after susceptibility, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
You'll know. You'll see the content come up, and you can post it then. Poll time. Okay, susceptibility. So I think I certainly had an extreme case of my susceptibility. I changed geography, and with that is like a new culture, twice. I also changed roles. It wasn't just the same role, different company. You know, I actually also picked up vastly different roles in somewhat quick succession. I leveled up, and I kept leveling up. So that was another stressor. I changed companies in addition to the country. So sometimes, you know, it could be that, like, for example, I was at REA, same sort of job, but now I'm based in Hong Kong for a bit, or Italy. But this was also different companies. And I think Andy really touched on this yesterday too, when he was talking about, you know, first day nerves. Like when you start, like it's not just about the toilets. It's like, how does this place work? You know, and there's the lingo and a new market. I mean, furnishings is fairly different when you're talking about warehousing, from autos or property to music and streaming. So these were all like massive changes. And community. And I can't stress this one enough. In terms of you sort of stressors, community was certainly one of them. And when I'm talking about community, it's like your friends, your family, your partner, your clubs, where it is that you get that sort of emotional fulfillment from. And I also changed that, you know, I did this on my own. I didn't have family. I didn't have a partner. I didn't have a boyfriend. I was in isolation. I can tell you, I was in deep isolation going through this. I'm going to pause there because I think we might have a, oh, no, it's gone. Okay. I have no idea how to use this, to be honest, but I'm just going to keep going with it. And I'm just going to get you to put voiceover, and otherwise I'll continue talking if you don't mind. I find it hard to try and flip between the 2 modes.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, good. Okay. So if I look at this list, I can see, like, in terms of susceptibility, it's the equivalent, you know, you see these videos of these kids like licking like armrests on airplanes, you know, going to the shelves at, like, going to a doctor's office and, like, I don't know, rubbing your nose along everything. I couldn't have been more susceptible, you know, and I look at it, it's like, what did you think was going to happen? You know, but I guess I have a high level of resilience, and I was leaning on that, and I was tapping it continually and just assuming that because I've been resilient, that I would always be resilient, and that, I mean, it's just stress, it's just me, it's just time on my own, like big deal, but that isn't, in fact, what happened. Chapter 2, transmission. So I will give you just 2 seconds here. I just saw the poll come up. That's great. Thanks, Ed. If you want to just take a second, and then I will go into transmission. Okay, I'm going to move on. So this is kind of that stage, I think, when you are susceptible, and then there's kind of like the seeding event or the seeding belief that gets you. And it was kind of clear for me looking back at what it was, but it's important to know too, it doesn't just happen like, like I know what it is. At the time, it was just something that was like, I thought about it here or there. But as I continued to go through the course of my life over the last 6 years, it was something that got stronger. What happened is that the only thing in my life really that I had with everything changing was my job. It was the reason that I was overseas. And there was this kind of belief that, well, if I've done all this and I've given all this up, this job had better work out. If I'm going to suffer like this, then this had better work out. Sheryl Sandberg, if you recall, she wrote a letter after her husband died, and it's beautiful. It talks about how to survive grief and suffering. And one of the things that she talked about was compartmentalization. And she said, that the important thing is that if you let any one event in your life leak with grief or pain, it will take over all the good parts of your life too. That at any point in time, it might be one thing that's troubling you, but there's often, generally is the case, that you have other good parts that you're overlooking. And she talked about the need to be able to do that. But if I look at what happened to me, I became my job. And I had only one bucket. I had put all the chips in, like on the table, all the money into one bucket. It was all or nothing. And my definition of my value of myself and my esteem and my performance, everything became about my job. I was there for a purpose. I'd better make it count. And certainly, it's not to say that I didn't, go travel or do other things. I took advantage of those as well. But the self identity really became about my performance at work and how I was doing. Chapter 3, incubation. So this is, this belief has, and this way of thinking has now basically infected me. It's the seed, right? And okay, interesting role. I'm just looking at the poll results, really interesting. Role 85%, and exactly. And I think we've all changed roles. And in combination, I think that the one thing too is that I would say, I think I forgot to make the point, is that in general, I think I would say choose one, maybe two of that list. Like, don't change all of them, or you're really like kind of, you may as well just jump off a ship with your wrists and your ankles tied together. That's what I did. Don't recommend it. So it's important to think about, if you're taking a new role and it's also going to be a new company, is to make sure, you're ready to manage that. But awesome. Thanks for participating in that. So let's talk about incubation. Yeah, this is the section. Okay, so on top of everything that was happening, on top of this mindset, was dealing, particularly for me, at like this next senior level. And I would say that the next level is predominantly defined by your ability to manage paradoxes, contradictions, and complexity. And you have to do it at pace. There were a number of contradictions, and I'm gonna go through these, and I'm just gonna read through them. There's gonna be a poll at the end. The point that I'm going to make in here is I have heard all of these, and each of these were things I don't know that I was able to resolve, and certainly not with all of them happening at the same time. I also ask you to reflect in terms of the messages that your organization sends, either explicitly or implicitly, about some of these things. Here we go. Take risks. Just do not fuck it up. Be transparent, but be discreet. Move quickly. I'm sorry, but did you get everyone on board with this? Make it happen. Don't be so pushy. Be vulnerable. But maintain your distance. You are a manager, not a friend. Be authentic. Gosh, you're too emotional. Ensure a thorough analysis. Don't waste your time on the details. There are no stupid questions, except for that one. And finally, and this is where I'm going to be a little sharp with organizations, we care about mental health, so long as you hold the pace. And this is one that I really want to pause on, because I think, and I'll make this point again through the presentation, that organizations are completely failing their people with most organizations, I can't speak for every organization, with the level of attention, support, and care that they're giving people in their workforce, and particularly leaders, going through and having to deal with so much complexity in a world that is changing faster and faster and faster and faster. There is no time for growth. There is no time for fucking up. There isn't time. And that pressure is enormous. So I'll get the poll. Yep. Thank you. So, how many of these do you witness in your organization? And I'll give you a minute to just sort of check. You can check multiple, I believe, from memory. All right. Yeah. Interesting. Okay, take risks, don't fuck it up. Yeah. Explicit content. I didn't put out a disclaimer at the beginning of that one. Censorship. Yeah, moving quickly and getting everybody on board, that idea between the sort of engagement. Oh, that was exciting. Engagement and doing proper engagement and onboarding people and getting, enough insight, but you need to move quickly, and the ability to do that is tough. And what's another one? Of course, taking risks. I've seen that one. And thorough analysis, but don't waste your time. You're like, no gold plating. And that was one that I really struggled with. Some of the questions that I would get answered would be, particularly deep, like the detail needs to be right. Like we actually need to have the number, but there was always this trade-off about doing too much. And, maybe there's no right answer for it. It's just one of those paradoxes. It's not solvable. There is no answer. But looking back on it, I appreciate at least putting them down and thinking about it so that I can process it better. And I wish I'd kind of done that at the time. You might have other ones, and I would encourage you to actually take a minute, as you see them in your organization, and call them out, because I think when you ask people to do things, you need to be clear about the sort of trade-offs. And I think as a manager, your fundamental responsibility is to manage priorities. And if your priorities are take a risk, I mean it, then you're going to have to be okay with failure. It might not work. And it's putting a lot of chips on the table. Are you ready to gamble with that? How much can you gamble? And if there is a limit, you need to make that clear. That, I think, is a manager's job. And if you're failing to recognize those and failing to support people, I think you're leading people down a kind of a hard path. Let's move on. Chapter 4, symptoms. So symptoms for me started by the time I got to Berlin. Absolutely. I'm just going to close that again. Certainly it started for me by the time I got to Berlin. And There were a few major ones. I mean, there were some minor ones as well. I'll just go into the major ones. The first, exhausted, tired, but I could not sleep. And I swear to God, that 0300 was the exact time I would wake up every night. I would go to bed 10:30, 11, maybe, and I would sleep until 3 a.m. and then I couldn't sleep again. So that's 4 hours of sleep per night for years. Years. I mean, there would be some exceptions, but very few. I could not sleep anymore. And one of the mistakes I made too was that I would wake up at 3, 4:01, 4:20, and I would do this a few times. I'm like, oh, screw it. Like, I'm not going to sleep anyway. I may as well get productive. If I'm not going to sleep, I may as well be productive. Well, what does that do? You just continually adding and adding and adding. And I was working around the clock, I would wake up at 3, I would work for a few hours, I would get ready to go to work by 8:39, I would be there till 6, I would come home at 7, crash, exhausted, not able to process anything, want to be alone, and lay on the couch, and then not able to sleep, but also not able to do anything. The second one, and this is a really critical one, is lonely, deeply lonely, but very withdrawn. And I think that this picture sort of depicts it perfectly. Is like head down on social media and distracted. Like the anxiety was really starting to build at this time. And instead of just kind of like, really take it down a few notches, it would be distraction. And, and I think, again, as I pointed out earlier with innocuous, is you can distract yourself. And I learned to distract myself. But here's some interesting statistics. And I'm going to talk about a book I read and some of the research that it points out. But becoming lonely is as stressful, as they point out, physiologically, as being punched by a stranger. To your body, it is one of the most disturbing things that can ever happen to you. And people who do not have friends or a partner have a 75% probability of becoming or falling into depression. If anything else happens, if there's another negative event, like it's pretty much certain. And that is troubling. So already, if you just don't have support and something happens, you're probably in a world of pain. Number 3, listening but not processing. I mean, no surprise, right? I'm sleeping 4 hours a night. Like, that's not good. But in addition to that, just the anxiety of wanting to perform well, but not being able to. And I guess the thing I would put it down to would be like, if you've ever learned another language, and at the beginning you're translating word for word, right? But then you can't understand the sentence. So it's like, I got that word, I got that word, I got that word. What the hell are we talking about? You spent so much mental energy on translating and dissecting the small things that you can't get back to the bigger meaning. And this is exactly what was happening for me. I literally would walk out of meetings. I couldn't follow. I would understand that there were different points of view, but I didn't really get what those points of view were. Like, why, like, what's the subtlety here? Like, what's the dependency? Why does that matter? I couldn't trace those sorts of things. And of course, that's a bad cycle. The more that happens and you start to realize that that's what's happening, the worse it gets. Another one, threatened and hypervigilant. The thing that happens when you feel threatened and fearful, anxious, is that you start noticing everything that could get you. And research has shown that people who are feeling threatened or are lonely, for example, they tested lonely and like socially connected people, and they found that those who were lonely could spot a potential threat in 150 milliseconds. And it took pretty much twice as long for socially connected people to get the same thing. And I think the problem that I particularly had with this is, like, all of a sudden, everybody's a threat. All of a sudden, like, you're taking things out of context. The way somebody looks at you, you're like, oh God, I'm in trouble for something, or I missed something, or I said something stupid. No matter what happens, everything becomes a threat. And that is also then adding into this spiral. So those were, the major things. There's a kind of, they point out the sort of tragedy of that cycle is that the people who need that support become inaccessible. They're not behaving well. They're hard to be around. And, you know, indeed, it says here they receive judgment and criticism. This accelerates the retreat from the world at a time when they actually needed, you know, more love. They get less love. And again, it's a bad cycle. And that was certainly the case with me. My personality changed a lot. And particularly by the time I got to Spotify, I mean, I was definitely at this stage in probably the second year, certainly during the second year that I was there. This was becoming a real problem for me. Okay, I am going to move into here the sort of diagnosis and illness stage. So this is when the penny dropped, as you would like to say. I went into the doctor's office because, you know, all this is happening, and I'm like I'm in conversations, and I don't even remember what I said. Quite frankly, like, I'm like, did I just say that? Like, what was my point? You know, and sometimes you start off and you go into a long-winded, I tend to do that anyway, but it was getting bad. Like, I would start to respond to something and totally lose track of what I was talking about. I had no idea. And so the conversation went something like this: doctor, I have a brain tumor. Okay, maybe it's Alzheimer's, but it's definitely one of them. And I explained, you know, like, this is what's happening, you know, and this and this. And I'm like, there's something really wrong. Like, I'm really worried, you know, and I had a few other health problems that I had seen her for. And her in her wisdom kind of like looked at me. She's like, okay, possibly, maybe. I mean, it's possible you have a brain tumor. It's possible. I can't dismiss it. But, and this is what got me, how are you? And thank goodness for her, you know, she asked a lot of questions. How are you? How much support do you have? How is work? How much time do you spend with friends? Are you sleeping? What's your diet like? You know, and it was all of these questions that I found like quite staggering. And I remember I'm like, work? I'm like, normal pressure. I mean, yeah, it's always busy. You know, I didn't see it. And she's like, listen, just so you know, and this was ground zero for me, this is burnout. And if you don't do something about this, this is going to get really serious. I've had people brought into this office who have no idea where they are and they don't know how they end up here. And of course, this is also can lead to, you know, long chronic cases of stress, depression, and of course it can lead to suicide. And that was something that she was worried about. You know, I got asked a lot of questions about willfulness to live, enjoyment of life, suicidal thoughts, etc. But this for me, it was like, oh, weird. Okay, I guess I could be depressed. You know, it was like, yeah, I guess I'm a little bit down. You know, but I cope with it. You know, I have things to do and I'm doing this and that. And, you know, I had really built up this bubble about my performance and how I was coping with the world. And it was that conversation that really brought it home for me. Chapter 6, treatment and recovery. You know, there were two parts to it. There was like the sort of inward and outward. And the doctor talked to me about this whole list. I was in Sweden at the time. And as you could probably guess, like the Swedish healthcare system was pretty incredible. You know, we talked about, you know, therapy, antidepressants or anti-anxiety medications to get that under control, exercise regimes, meditation, taking downtime, getting my sleep back on track, socializing, finding something I was passionate about. What did I enjoy doing? For me, DJing, love, affection, you know, digital detox. And one of the things we talked about, and that came up particularly through therapy, was like, and the right job. So, you know, I walked out of that and it was like, okay, I'm going to have to really like rebuild my life here and start a fresh page. And I decided it was time to leave. I said goodbye to my friends. This is my goodbye party, DJing with my favorite DJs at Spotify DJ Club. And, you know, I had to say goodbye to a lot of people. Packed up my stuff, sold a lot, put it into storage. This is a team that helped me move. Flew back to Canada. I decided, you know, I ain't got any other place to go. I haven't been home for a long time. I mean, I've been gone for 20 years. It'd be good to reconnect with my family. You know, I still have my parents. I still have my aunts and uncles and all of my cousins. And I thought this is a very precious time in life. I should take advantage of it. This is a picture flying over the Rockies between Alberta and British Columbia. This is my family. And this is really touching for me. This is Christmas time, and this is like, you know, these are my people. And it was such a joy, and it has been such a joy to be surrounded by acceptance and love and appreciation. I got a dog. Talk about affection. You get your face washed every morning. And I think, you know, for pets, really so important. I can't even understate how important a pet is, particularly for people who are single and don't, you know, have anybody. Get a pet. They are wonderful, and they force you into a routine, which is something else I really like. I have to go to bed at 9:30 because she wakes up at 6. You know, it's like, that's just going to happen, and she needs to go for a walk. I get outside. My life becomes into like a pattern, and she's just super funny. Anybody who follows me on Instagram would know how much I love my dog. Again, like I go running and I take her with me. She's a joy. But that's, you know, something else in terms of my health is like running and exercising. I've been doing renovation. There's something very fulfilling about projects of like that you have control over and that you can put your hand and your sweat into and seeing an improvement. I took an online course in SEM and SEO, social media, at London Business School. I wanted to learn something new. You know, it's a new skill set. Why not? I'm interested in sort of creative side of business as well. And then I started putting, and this is kind of, you know, coming into sort of closing, but then I started to really put into place what happened to me and what I understood of some of the rules, some of the lessons that I learned. They go like this. The first one was, you know, if I can't do the job without giving up my well-being, then I can't do the job. And that was when I decided, it's like, listen, this has gone too far. You know, I wish I could have stayed on with Spotify. I wish I could have performed better. I wish that could happen, but it couldn't. And maybe, you know, I can go back, I'm sure, but like not now. I'm not happy and I'm not well. And there's no sense in me continuing with this. I need to regroup. I need to rebuild myself. I need to respect my own personal boundaries. And I really need to dedicate time and energy to that for a change, not just my career. And so it's kind of like rebuilding those buckets and filling them back up again. I realized that I had set myself up. You know, we talked about the vulnerability list. It was like, what did I think was going to happen? I don't know what I'm going to do next, but I can tell you that's a list I'll consider in terms of, you know, where do I go and how do I go about doing that? Another major thing I realized too is that the higher you go, the less room there is for failure and the less success becomes tangible. And for me, like, and that is a fact, this is the truth. Like, people are making big decisions. They're impressive. The intelligence, the sort of processing logic is incredible, especially at Spotify. Being witness to the meetings that I was in, and the technical leadership and just the sort of business acumen was phenomenal. And I would say that, you know, certainly Redbubble as well, REA as well, Scout as well. All of these companies, I really got to bear witness to just exceptional performance. And you know, they're making big decisions and they're making them constantly. Hats off. I don't know that it's what I can do going forward. Maybe, possibly. I mean, maybe not right now. And maybe I'll come back to that. But hats off. I think that was the thing that impressed me the most. But it is true. I want to stress this point. We patronize failure. We deeply patronize failure. We don't give enough credit to how shitty failure really is and what it feels like. It hurts. It leaves you maybe embarrassed, but possibly even ashamed of yourself. It is demoralizing. It can run in, you know, totally wreck your self-esteem. And if you're not careful with it, you end up in a bad cycle of anxiety, depression. And for some people, suicide. You know, it wouldn't be the first time you hear about high rollers making one big mistake, losing it, and they commit suicide. We shouldn't be so light about it. It's a lesson of virtue. Maybe after the fact, but for somebody in it, we shouldn't be so patronizing about how bad it really is to go through it. I look at this now, I can remember what it felt like, and I have a lot of empathy for people who are going through the same. And there are a lot of people who are going through the same. This is a big one. Don't work for somebody who does not value you or what you do. This is from Jordan Peterson in one of his talks, and he talks about, you know, if you're being asked to do things that make you feel weak, if you're being asked to do things that, you know, make you, weaker or feeling poor about yourself and jeopardizing sort of your own will, that you can't work for an organization or a person that does that. And in one of the organizations I work for, I won't say which one, I actually had a boss tell me, sort of, Kerri, I'm not interested in operations, which is basically saying what I was contributing all of my time and passion to, didn't care. And this is the person who judges my performance. That for me should have been like a clear, like, okay, bye, but I persisted. Oh, and by the way, yeah, that's also good advice for dating, just as a hot tip. Treat yourself like you matter. Another Jordan Peterson. I realize now, looking back, I didn't treat myself like I mattered. I was sacrificing myself and self and what I needed and felt for the betterment of the job or the company or my boss or whomever, but not for myself. And that was a seriously major failure. Again, this is the book that I was talking about. I really recommend it. I read it recently, Lost Connections. What he talks about basically is that it's not all of a sudden there's a world crisis in serotonin levels that are impacting the depression and why it's on the rise. He talks about it's the fact that we're losing connection from each other, from meaning, from purpose, from respect, from control, from I think there's like 7 or 8 things that he lists. And, when I went through it, it was like I had 5 of the 7. I really recommend the book. The thing that you would get out of that book is like the importance of remaining connected. And that was part of my decision to come home. I mean, I hadn't read the book at that stage, but that is a major lesson, is the importance of remaining connected. So if I think about vaccination and like what we can do to help prevent this, and just sort of closing remarks, my take is that organizations are grossly underprepared to deal with what is happening now. And I think what is coming. The world is changing. The environment is a disaster. We don't know what's going to happen. And I mean, predictions with climate change is that it's going to get worse. It's going to get more volatile. It's going to get more extreme. And our entire economy is based on that. But as people witness that, it's going to get worse. I'd also say that leaders are not prepared to deal with what is happening. If I think about my journey and where I was at, I cannot blame my managers in any way for not knowing how to deal with me. How many people get trained with dealing with people who are doing or who are not okay? Nobody gets training on that. We talk, again, I think it's like this patronizing approach that we have to failure and to depression. It's just another sunny day. It's just another opportunity to improve, and we need to have really honest conversations, but we also need to give leaders access to training and to understanding what's happening and how to deal with this, because it's not about performance. The performance follows the person. And if the person is not well, the performance is going to be way in the back. And I guess this is out of order because this should say, what is going on? The final point I would make is like, stay connected. The only thing, the major thing I would encourage all of you is please stay connected and keep people connected to you. Look for those who are isolated, help them. I saw a friend on Facebook, somebody donated their dog to her because, she's 60 something, she lives alone and she's isolated, and they dropped their dog off so that she had company. That is such a tremendous act of compassion. I really hope that everybody here can take on that awareness and spread that awareness and support to those around you, to your family, your friends, your distant friends. Really think out, what you can do to help others and remaining connected, because we're falling apart and our societies are getting, and our organizations are getting more and more disconnected. And I'm just an example of like what happens when you lose your connection. And I'm glad that I'm recovering, and I'm glad that I had, the access to resources to help me with that. A lot of people don't. So I'll leave it there. That is my wrap up. I'm just bringing it in under time. I know Ed said to me, maybe make it a bit quicker than that, but it just, I rambled. If you want to stay connected, here are my details. Please do reach out to me. And, if you've gone through a personal journey that's similar, I would love to hear about it. I am not working. I'm reading, I'm running with my dog. I have time, you know, and I deeply care about what's happening. And if there's anything I can help you with in terms of the way you're managing teams or yourself, or you know, you want to talk to somebody about a great book or whatever, let's do it. And again, I would just leave with big thanks to Ed. I think Ed and his team have taken on part of the solution, you know, looking for this opportunity and how is it that we can all get together during this time and use it to our advantage, but also as a way of connecting this way. So thank you to Ed on my behalf for pulling me into this. And certainly I'm sure that you would all extend a big thank you to him for doing the same for you. Thank you.